Welcome to APABI Focus. Today we have Giles Cuthbert from the Chartered Banker Institute from the UK. CBI is kind of a unique institute within APABI because it's not actually within the Asia Pacific. But I think maybe you can give a little background. What does the CBI do around the world, including with other APABI member institutes?
Thank you for that kind introduction, David. The Chartered Banker Institute, as you know, is the oldest institute in the world, and indeed next year is our 150th anniversary. We were founded in 1875. But we've always held the view that the title Chartered Banker isn't something that should just be restricted to our privilege, as it were. We've always been keen to share that with other bodies and with other partners around the globe. And as a result, we have a number of very close relationships with partners in Malaysia, Australia, India, and we've worked closely with Taiwan and many other institutes in APABI who have partnered with us so that their members can access Chartered Banker status. So, for example, if you qualify in India, you can take a top up to become a Chartered Banker. If you qualify as a banker in Malaysia, you can become a Chartered Banker, and likewise in Australasia. So we have a range of close relationships with institutes which allow people to become Chartered Bankers, which is, of course, the global gold standard for banking qualification. It's many years now we've worked with the members of APABI, and I would like to highlight at that point that one of our first activities within APABI was when the Taiwan Academy of Banking and Finance translated our book on ethics way back in, I think, 1999 that was. It's a very, very long time. That's over a quarter of a century. We've had a great relationship.
Very good. Of course, as a chartered banker, you're going to be paying attention to a lot of different regulatory trends. But one that I was kind of interested in, in the last couple of years has been green finance. And I know you've done a lot of work on that, and you can tell us a little bit about that in a second. But one interesting trend that I kind of want to get your opinion on is green hushing, which is kind of the opposite of greenwashing. Companies or banks are kind of paring back their green claims for a number of different reasons. Do you think that this trend of green sustainability, green finance has kind of reached a high mark? Or what is the significance of this green hushing?
So I think there's two things. I mean, you could argue that green hushing demonstrates that climate and sustainability issues have become business as usual, and therefore banks and other financial organizations don't feel the same need to highlight it as something new or different that they're doing. So that's certainly one possibility. We also have the challenge that as we all adapt to meeting higher and higher targets, that what we might wish to celebrate one year isn't quite as stunning an achievement the following year, and therefore we've not shouted about it quite as much as we should. As far as have we reached a high water mark, I think for me the key in all of this is focusing actually on the opportunities for banks and financial services organizations. We know sustainable industries are going to grow. We know there's fantastic opportunities in terms of financing sustainable organizations. And we as institutes also know that there's a huge amount of interest in qualifications around green and sustainable finance.
So, our focus, what we're thinking about for this quarter is compliance. I guess the question that I'm interested in is to what extent are these sustainability initiatives going to be driven by regulators? Are they going to be driven within? Because I think that's kind of what the issue of green hushing is getting at. Like maybe, did they kind of get ahead of the horse here a little bit?
And I think the answer to that is very different in different countries. So if I look at the UK, for example, where the regulator is typically very consultative with banks and with other financial organizations, and they'll do long-term consultations as they bring together regulation. You tend to see a situation where the regulator can often be keeping pace with or lagging behind the activity in the marketplace. Of course, in other countries, you have regulators who are very good at bringing in regulations pretty much immediately, and then the organizations, the banks, have to react to that. So I think it's a very different picture in different countries, but I think for sure you're right that interaction between greenhushing and the regulators and how that operates is really quite complex, because we know banks already have to do so much reporting at this point in time, and the sustainability reporting frameworks are coming in from regulators, but obviously they all have a range of voluntary frameworks that they're working with as well, such as the Principles for Responsible Banking. And I think this leads to a situation where a lot of banks have attempted to get ahead of regulation by signing up to the PRB, knowing that most regulators will accept something like that as a submission. And so therefore that could be very helpful with their position. So I do think there's a very variable dynamic in different countries about how this is playing out, to be honest.
Yeah, that's interesting to get your perspective, having, worked in a lot of these different countries. And one of the things that, you mentioned the principles of responsible banking, and I guess one of your big initiatives for the past year or so has been the Principles of Responsible Banking Academy.
Yeah, well, I think I'll probably link that back to your last question as well, because I think one of the things that is specifically complex about sustainability and green initiatives is the extent to which they run across all of an organization in different ways, whether that is a customer applying for credit and looking at, okay, what's the sustainability of that business and what's their environmental impact, or whether that's how you're actually running your firm and your own internal emissions, etc. And I think what that tells us is, when you consider that many models of regulation are around responsibility, and in many cases individual responsibility, the complexity around the organization of how sustainability impacts means that we really have to seek to ensure that everyone has an understanding of how the organization and society is being impacted, and therefore that responsibility becomes much more spread throughout the organization, with many individuals having to take responsibility. So I think where that led us to with the Principles for Responsible Banking Academy is that we wanted to make available some basic training in sustainability across organizations that would align to the UN Principles for Responsible Banking. So it's made up of, at this point in time, 6 courses which cover climate risk, an introduction to responsible banking, a leadership module, and 2 nature modules. But the one, interestingly, we've seen is the most successful is called Clients and Customers. And that's about how you can run your conversations with your customers to ensure that you're getting a clear picture of that business in terms of sustainability. Now, why I say that is because, of course, we all know that in most banks, a banker will be working with a CRM in front of them and they'll be inputting data. But what we need to make sure is that the right questions are being asked and the right data is being collected from clients. Because, of course, how do you measure your emissions if you don't have the right data? that very point in itself sort of shows the complexity of what we're trying to deal with here. How do you gather the data, and then how do you accurately process that data, and how do you ensure its validity? So the idea of that course is to improve those conversations, and we found that very popular in a number of banks, because it really does run through what do you as a business banker need to know to do your job better, to spot opportunities in the marketplace, to spot which businesses to invest in, and also potentially to spot which businesses that you might wish to analyse your risk a bit more.
Okay. Well, that's the time that we have today, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for your time as well.
All right. Bye.
Bye.